It was a bright golden morning, and the city was alive with excitement because the most talk about wedding of the year was happening that day. The daughter of one of the richest businessmen in town, Laura, was getting married to Daniel, a humble and kind man who had captured hearts with his soft nature and gentle smile. People whispered that it was a fairy tale come true, a simple man marrying a rich and beautiful woman. And the newspapers even called it the match of dreams. But not everyone knew what was waiting behind those glittering lights and music. Laura stood in front of the mirror, her diamond necklace shining like tiny stars. She looked at herself with pride and smiled in satisfaction. She had everything: money, fame, beauty. And now she was marrying a man who adored her completely. Her mother entered and said proudly, "My daughter, you will be the most beautiful bride this city has ever seen." Laura laughed softly and said, "Of course, I deserve nothing less. Everyone will talk about this wedding for years." Outside the huge hall, hundreds of guests arrived in cars that sparkled under the sun. There were flowers everywhere, music in the air, and laughter around every corner. Daniel arrived quietly with his family. He looked nervous but happy. His eyes searched for Laura, the woman he loved deeply. He had always believed that love could bridge the gap between rich and poor, between pride and humility. He wanted to prove that hearts mattered more than money. As the ceremony began, people clapped and smiled, cameras flashed, and the hall glittered like a dream. Laura walked in wearing her long white gown, her veil floating like mist. Everyone gasped at her beauty. Daniel could not take his eyes off her. He felt lucky. He felt chosen. But little did he know that this perfect day would soon twist into something painful. While the guests were enjoying the food and music, an old car stopped outside the hall, and a simple woman stepped out. Her name was Maya. She wore a plain cotton dress, her hair tied back neatly, and in her hand she held a small gift wrapped in brown paper. No one noticed her at first as she quietly walked into the hall, but when she reached the bride to offer her gift, everything changed. Laura looked at Maya from head to toe, and her lips curled into a cool smile. She spoke loudly so that everyone around could hear her. "Who invited you? This is not a charity event." The crowd went silent for a moment. Maya blinked in surprise and tried to explain that she had come to give her blessings. But Laura laughed again, her voice sharp and proud. "Look at her dress. It looks like it came from a market sale. Someone please show her the way out before she ruins my pictures," a few of Laura's. Friends began to giggle, whispering cruel jokes under their breath. Daniel froze. His heart tightened. He wanted to say something, but before he could speak, Maya smiled sadly and said in a soft voice that reached every corner of the room, "Sometimes, what you give today, you may take back tomorrow." Her words were calm but powerful, and for a moment, even the laughter stopped. The music faded, and the lights seemed dimmer, but Laura waved her hand carelessly, saying, "Oh, please, take your word somewhere else. This is my day, and I do not need your bad luck." Maya bowed her head politely and turned to leave, her step slow and steady, no anger in her eyes, only sadness. She placed a small gift on a nearby table and walked out of the hall. Daniel watched her go, his heart heavy with guilt and confusion. He could not understand why Laura had to be so cruel. He looked at the gift on the table, the plain brown paper standing out among all the gold wrapping and flowers. Something about it felt different, but before he could reach for it, the photographers called him for pictures, and the moment passed. The rest of the evening went on with laughter, dancing, and joy. But Daniel's smile began to fade. Every time he looked at Laura, he saw her proud face when she insulted Maya, and every time he closed his eyes, he heard Maya's voice again. "What you give today, you may take back tomorrow." Those words played in his mind like an echo he could not escape. The guests did not notice his silence. They were too busy celebrating the rich bride and her glamorous wedding. As the night ended, fireworks lit up the sky, and everyone cheered for the couple. Laura held Daniel's hand and smiled at the cameras. She whispered, "We made history tonight. Everyone will remember me." But Daniel's heart was not at peace. He felt something strange, like a shadow growing behind all the glitter. He looked toward the gift table one last time and saw the small brown box still lying there, untouched, simple, quiet, and forgotten, just like the woman who brought it. And as the music faded and the guests began to leave, Daniel did not know that Maya's words were not just a warning. They were the beginning of something that would soon turn his perfect wedding into a story no one would ever forget. The sun rose softly behind the curtains of the grand hotel room, where the air still smelled of flowers and perfume from the wedding night. Laura woke up first, stretching lazily on the silk sheets, smiling proudly as she looked at the diamond ring on her finger. She whispered to herself that she was now the wife of Daniel. The man everyone said was too simple for her. She felt powerful. She felt admired. She felt that she had won. Beside her, Daniel still slept quietly, his face calm but his heart heavy even in his dreams, because the image of Maya walking away with that sad smile would not leave his mind. He tossed and turned, hearing her voice again and again. What you give today, you may take back tomorrow. When Daniel finally opened his eyes, the room was bright and noisy. Laura was already talking loudly on the phone, laughing with her friends about the wedding. She said things like, "Did you see that poor woman who tried to bring me that ugly gift? It was hilarious. My guests will remember how I sent her away." Her laughter was sharp like broken glass. Daniel sat up slowly, his eyes tired. He said softly, "Laura, maybe you should not speak like that." She meant no harm, but Laura rolled her eyes and said, "Daniel, you are too kind. You do not understand how people like her try to bring bad luck into good places. You must learn to think like me if you want to live in my world." Her tone was proud and careless. She looked at herself in the mirror again and smiled at her own reflection as if the world belonged only to her. Downstairs, breakfast was ready. The hall was filled with servants carrying trays of food and drinks. Laura's father sat at the table, reading the morning news, his face serious. He did not look up when Laura greeted him. She noticed his mood and asked what was wrong. He said nothing at first, then slowly said that something strange had happened overnight. The company's biggest business deal had been canceled suddenly. The partners had pulled out without warning. Laura frowned and said it was probably a mistake. But her father shook his head. "This is not a small deal. It is worth millions, and they will not explain why they backed out." He sighed deeply, the first shadow of worry crossing his face. Laura laughed lightly and said, "Father, relax. Business goes up and down. Tomorrow everything will be fine again." She looked at Daniel as if expecting him to agree. But Daniel said quietly, "Maybe this is a sign that something is wrong. Maybe we need to think carefully." Laura frowned at him, her pride flashing in her eyes. "You are overreacting." She said, "We are fine. Do not bring bad energy into our new life." She walked away, her perfume filling the air, leaving Daniel sitting there with his thoughts swirling like waves in a storm. After breakfast, a maid entered holding a small brown envelope. She said that someone had left it at the door early in the morning. There was no name on it, only the words for Laura written neatly on the front. Laura took it with curiosity, thinking it was a letter of congratulations. But when she opened it, there was only one small piece of paper inside, with a single sentence written in graceful handwriting. "A heart without kindness will always lose what it loves most." Laura read it aloud and laughed. "How poetic," she said mockingly, "probably from that poor woman who came yesterday. What was her name? Maya. Yes, she must think she is a prophet." Daniel listened quietly, his chest tightening as he heard Maya's name again. Laura crumpled the paper and threw it aside, saying, "These people have too much time." Daniel picked it up gently and looked at the words again. They seemed simple but carried something heavy, something true. He slipped the note into his pocket without saying a word. Laura did not notice. She was busy showing her new jewelry to her friends who had arrived to gossip and drink tea. Their laughter filled the room like music. But underneath that laughter was something strange. The air felt different. Even the maids whispered to each other about the bad energy in the house. Later that day, Laura's father received another phone call. His voice grew tense as he listened. His hand shook slightly when he put the phone down. He turned to Laura and said, "Another deal has failed, and the bank want to review our accounts. Something is very wrong." Laura's smile faded for the first time, but she quickly said, "Do not worry, Father. Maybe it is just bad timing." But Daniel could feel a chill inside him. Something invisible was moving around him, something that began the moment. Laura mocked that poor woman at the wedding. As night fell, the house became quiet. Laura prepared for a dinner party to celebrate her new marriage. She wore another sparkling dress, pretending that nothing was wrong. Daniel stood near the window, watching the street outside. The world looked peaceful, but inside he felt uneasy. He asked Laura again, "Why did you humiliate Maya like that? What harm did she do to you?" Laura scoffed. "Because she did not belong there. Simple people should know their place." Daniel turned away, his heart breaking. A little. The woman he married was not the woman he thought he loved. The wind outside grew stronger, blowing softly through the open window. The same kind of wind that had followed Maya when she left the hall. Somewhere far away, Maya sat near her window too, whispering quietly. "I warned her." But she laughed. Tomorrow will show her the truth. The candle beside her flickered as if agreeing with her words, and in that moment, the fate of the rich bride began to twist slowly, silently, like a thread pulled by unseen hands, setting the stage for the day when Daniel would finally walk away. The night after the strange letter arrived, Daniel could not sleep. He lay awake listening to the ticking of the clock, the sound growing louder with every passing minute. Laura slept peacefully beside him, dreaming of parties and rich friends and new dresses. But Daniel's mind was filled with questions. He kept seeing Maya's calm face and hearing her voice saying that what you give today you may take back tomorrow. Those words felt like a shadow following him everywhere. He finally got up and looked out the window. The sky was dark, but a faint light glowed from the east, like a quiet promise of truth waiting to be found. The next morning, Laura was busy talking to her event planner about another celebration she wanted to host. Her father was on the phone again trying to save what was left of his business, and the servants moved around quietly afraid of Laura's sharp temper. Daniel sat silently at the breakfast table, his heart heavy. The more he thought about Maya, the more he wanted to know who she really was. She had not come to the wedding by accident. He was sure of that. Her words and her look had meaning, something deep that Laura could never understand. After breakfast, while Laura was busy choosing decorations for her party, Daniel quietly left the house. He took the small note from his pocket, the one Maya had sent, and looked again at her handwriting. There was something graceful about it, calm and kind yet full of strength. At the bottom of the letter was a faint mark that looked like an address. Daniel decided to go there. He walked through quiet streets and crowded markets until he reached a small lane where the noise of the city faded away. There stood a tiny house with flowers blooming at the gate. It was simple but full of peace. He knocked gently on the door and waited. Maya opened the door herself, wearing the same calm smile he remembered. She did not look surprised to see him. Instead, she said softly, "I knew you would come." Daniel lowered his head respectfully and said, "I came to ask who you are. Why did you come to our wedding? Why did you warn us like that?" Maya stepped aside and said, "Come in." Daniel entered and looked around. The house was small but warm. The air smelled of jasmine and old books. There were pictures on the wall of a man and a young girl, and a small shelf filled with candles and framed letters. Maya poured tea for him and sat down quietly before answering. She said, "Once upon a time, I was close to your wife's family. My husband was a business partner of Laura's father. He helped him start his company many years ago. When my husband died, I was left alone with little money. I went to her father for help, but he turned his back on me, said he owed me nothing. And since then, they all pretended I did not exist." Daniel felt a cold shiver down his spine as Maya continued. "When I heard about the wedding, I wanted to go and bless the couple. I wanted to show that forgiveness is stronger than anger. But when I saw Laura that day, her eyes full of pride, her heart filled with cruelty, I saw the same pride that once destroyed her father's kindness, and that is when I spoke those words, not to curse but to remind her that everything you do returns to you in time." Daniel listened quietly, his hands trembling slightly. He could not believe what he was hearing. He finally understood why Maya's words had sounded so powerful. They came from a place of pain, but also from wisdom. He said softly, "I am sorry for what she did. She should not have treated you that way." Maya smiled kindly and said, "I do not hold anger. I only speak what is true, and truth always finds its way back home." Daniel nodded, but inside he felt something break, the image of Laura laughing. At the wedding now filled him with shame. He could not understand how love could survive when pride stood in its way. Before he left, Maya handed him a small folded paper and said, "Take this. It is not for you but for her. When the time comes, she will understand." Daniel took it without opening it. Promising he would give it to Laura, Maya looked at him with eyes full of quiet strength and said, "Remember, Daniel, love is not built on gold or beauty. It is built on mercy. When mercy dies, love follows." Her words echoed in his heart as he walked away from the little house. The sky above, turning gray as clouds, began to form. When Daniel returned home, Laura was furious. "Where have you been?" she shouted. "I was calling you for hours." He looked at her calm but distant and said, "I went to meet the woman you mocked." Laura froze for a second and laughed loudly. "Unbelievable. You went to that poor woman's house. Have you lost your mind?" Daniel said quietly, "No, I found my conscience." She looked at him with disbelief, his tone different from before, his eyes colder. She tried to joke it away, but the distance between them had already begun to grow like a wall too high to climb. That night, while Laura tried to call her friends, Daniel sat in silence, thinking of Maya's last words, the paper still in his pocket waiting to be opened, but he could not bring himself to read it. He felt it was not yet the right time. Outside the rain began to fall softly. washing the dust off the streets. Inside the mansion, the light shimmered, but the warmth was gone, and far away. Maya looked out her window, whispering to herself that the truth had begun to move, slowly, quietly, but surely toward the house that once laughed at kindness. The next morning began with thunder in the sky and fear in the air. The mansion that once glowed with laughter now felt heavy with silence. Laura sat by the window sipping her coffee, her face pale and her eyes restless. Her father paced across the room, talking on the phone again, his voice shaking as he begged his business partners not to leave him. But one by one they were pulling out. Something strange was happening to everything they owned. Every deal was collapsing like a tower made of sand, and no one could explain why. Laura's mother tried to stay calm, saying it was just a bad week, but Laura felt a strange chill inside her heart. She thought about Maya for a second and shook her head quickly, whispering to herself that it was nonsense. That woman could not have anything to do with this. But deep inside she felt a flicker of fear, a tiny whisper that maybe the humiliation she caused was coming back to her. She tried to ignore it. She told herself that rich people do not fear simple women, yet her hands trembled as she picked up her cup again. Daniel sat quietly at the table, his eyes on the small folded paper that Maya had given him. He had not opened it yet, but the weight of it felt heavier every day. He had not spoken to Laura much since his visit to Maya's house. The distance between them grew stronger with every word left unsaid. Laura noticed it and hated it. She wanted Daniel to adore her like before, but now his eyes held something different. Something she could not control, and that made her angry. At lunch, when the family gathered, Laura tried to act normal. She talked about her new jewelry, her plans for a photo shoot, and the people she planned to invite to her next party. But no one seemed interested. Her father was silent. Her mother looked worried, and Daniel just kept looking at her with quiet disappointment. Finally, he said softly, "Laura, do you ever think about how people feel when you speak to them like they are nothing?" She blinked in surprise and laughed nervously. "Daniel, you still talking about that woman? I told you, she came to my wedding uninvited. She did not belong there." Daniel's eyes darkened. Maybe she did belong. Maybe she had more heart than all of us here. Laura's voice rose. "How dare you talk to me like that? Do you know who I am?" Daniel looked straight at her and said, "Yes, I know, and that is what hurts me most." Laura froze. She had never heard him speak like that. Her pride made her shout louder. "You are just jealous of what I have. You should be grateful you married into this family." Daniel stood up slowly and said, "I was grateful until I saw what pride can do to a soul." His words cut through the room like thunder, and everyone fell silent. That evening, Laura sat alone in her room, surrounded by her mirrors and perfumes. She looked at her reflection, but for the first time she did not see beauty. She saw fear, doubt, and the echo of her own cruelty. She remembered Maya's calm eyes, her quiet voice, and the way Daniel had defended her. She whispered to herself, "Why does everyone care about that woman? She is nothing." But even as she said the words, her heart felt heavy as if it no longer believed the lie. Downstairs, Daniel finally opened the folded paper Maya had given him. His hand shook as he read the words written in neat handwriting. "Pride builds walls and kindness breaks them. The moment you mock a heart that means no harm, you invite pain into your own home." Daniel read the line again and again. His throat tight, he looked around the house, at the paintings and chandeliers and golden chairs, and realized how empty it all felt. He remembered the joy he once felt when he proposed to Laura, how he believed she had a kind heart behind her pride. But now that belief was gone, replaced by silence and sorrow. Suddenly the lights flickered, and the rain began to pour harder outside. Laura came running into the living room shouting for the servants. She said one of her father's trucks had caught fire at the company's storage yard. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Daniel tried to calm her, but she pushed his hand away, saying, "It is all your fault. You brought this bad luck, you and that poor woman," she screamed. Daniel looked at her in disbelief, his voice breaking as he said, "Laura, stop blaming others for what you created." She glared at him, her anger turning to tears. "You do not understand me. You never did." He whispered, "I tried, but you never let me." The night grew darker. The rain turned into a storm, and the family gathered in the living room as the sound of thunder echoed outside. Laura's father sat with his head in his hands, whispering that everything was lost. Laura looked around helplessly, realizing that the world she built on money was falling apart piece by piece. Daniel stood by the window, his face hidden in the shadows. He said quietly, "Sometimes life takes away everything just to show you what really matters." Laura turned toward him, but he did not meet her eyes. Instead, he walked away slowly toward their room, leaving her standing in the middle of the empty hall. When the storm finally stopped, Laura looked out the window at the quiet night. Her heart aching with confusion and fear, she felt the loneliness she had never known before. And far away, in her small house, Maya whispered softly into the wind, "The lesson has begun. The proud must learn to bend before life breaks them." And though no one heard her words, their echo carried through the darkness straight into the mansion that once sparkled with gold and laughter. The rain had stopped, but the air inside the mansion was still heavy and cold. Laura sat on the staircase wrapped in her silk robe, her hair messy and her eyes swollen from crying. She looked around at the half-dark hall where once laughter and music had echoed. Now only silence remained. The servants moved quietly like shadows, afraid to speak or even look at her. Her father was upstairs arguing on the phone. Her mother locked herself in her room, and Daniel had not spoken a single word since. The night before, Laura whispered to herself again and again that everything would be fine, that she would fix it all, but the more she said it, the less she believed it. Daniel came down the stairs slowly, his suitcase in one hand and a quiet sadness in his eyes. Laura jumped up when she saw him, her voice shaking. "Where are you going?" He did not answer right away. He just looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing her for the first time. He said softly, "I'm leaving." Laura blinked, her lips trembling. "Leaving? What do you mean leaving? We just got married." Daniel sighed deeply and said, "I tried to stay. I tried to believe that love could change everything. But love cannot survive where kindness is missing." Laura stepped closer, her voice rising. "You cannot just walk away. I'm your wife. You made a promise." Daniel's eyes were calm but firm. "I made a promise to love you, but you broke the part that made love possible." Laura shook her head desperately, her pride and fear mixing into one storm inside her chest. She said, "You are blaming me for everything. This is all because of that poor woman. Ever since she came into our lives, nothing has been right." Daniel looked at her sadly. "Maya did not bring bad luck. She only showed us who we really are." Laura froze at his words, her heart pounding fast. She tried to hold his arm, but he gently moved her hand away. Her tears fell onto the marble floor like tiny drops of glass. She cried, "Please, Daniel, do not go. I can change. I will be better. I will say sorry to her. Just do not leave me alone." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment and said, "Laura, I wanted to see that heart yesterday. Not today. Love cannot wait for pain to teach it." He walked past her toward the door, the suitcase bumping softly against his leg. Laura followed him, her bare feet cold against the floor. She said, "If you walk out now, you will regret it. I swear you will." Daniel stopped at the door and turned slightly, his voice quiet but strong. "Maybe, but I would regret staying more, because then I would lose myself completely." He opened the door and stepped out into the gray morning, the sound of the rain starting again outside, as if the sky itself wept for. Laura ran to the window, watching him walk away down the long driveway, his figure growing smaller with every step. She screamed his name, but the wind carried her voice away. Her legs gave out, and she sank to the floor, sobbing like a child. Her father came downstairs asking what happened, but when he saw the empty doorway, he said nothing. He just walked away silently. Even he understood that this loss was beyond repair. The house that had once been full of pride now felt like a tomb. Hours later, Laura sat in the living room holding the small brown box that Maya had left at the wedding. It had been pushed aside all this time, forgotten under piles of gifts. She opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a silver bracelet, simple and beautiful, and a folded piece of paper with a message written in the same neat handwriting she remembered. "True beauty lives in the heart not in gold." Laura's hands shook as she read it, her tears falling onto the words. She clutched the bracelet to her chest, whispering, "I was wrong. I was so wrong," her voice breaking as if the truth itself was too heavy to carry. Meanwhile, Daniel walked through the quiet streets with no umbrella, his clothes soaked but his heart strangely light. He felt pain but also peace. He remembered Maya's gentle smile and her words that mercy is the root of love. He knew he could not change Laura, but he could choose to walk away before both of them drowned in pride. He did not know where he would go, but he knew he had to start over somewhere far from the mansion of gold and lies. As the day faded into night, Laura sat alone by the window staring at the bracelet in her hand. She replayed every moment she had mocked Maya, every word she had thrown at Daniel, and every time she had chosen pride over kindness. Her reflection in the glass no longer looked like the rich bride everyone admired. It looked like a stranger, a woman broken by her own heart. She whispered softly to the empty room, "Daniel, please come back." But there was no answer, only the sound of rain tapping on the window like tiny hands of regret. In the small house across town, Maya lit a candle and closed her eyes. She whispered a quiet prayer for the couple, not of revenge but of healing. She hoped Laura would find her heart again and that Daniel would find peace. Outside her window, the wind carried her words into the distance, toward the mansion where a proud woman wept for the love she had lost. And somewhere deep inside her soul, Laura finally began to understand the meaning of Maya's words. What you give today, you may take back tomorrow. The morning light slipped quietly into the mansion through half-closed curtains. The house that once sparkled with gold now looked tired and gray. Laura sat by the window in her wedding gown that she had refused to take off since Daniel left, her hair tangled and her eyes red from crying. She whispered his name again and again, hoping somehow he would hear her, but only the echo of her voice came back to her. Outside, the garden that once bloomed with roses now looked dull under the heavy rain. It felt as if everything around her was mourning with her. Days turned into weeks, and the silence grew heavier. Her father's company went bankrupt. Her mother fell ill from the stress, and all the people who once called Laura their friend had disappeared. No phone calls, no visits, no laughter. Only empty rooms filled with dust and regret. The servants had left too because they had not been paid, and Laura now walked through the grand halls alone, her footsteps echoing through the marble floors like whispers of her own mistakes. Sometimes she would sit on the staircase at night holding the silver bracelet Maya had given, reading the message again and again. True beauty lives in the heart, not in gold. Each time she read it, the words cut deeper. One cold evening, Laura went through her old photo albums, her fingers tracing the pictures from the wedding. She saw herself smiling proudly next to Daniel, the sparkle in his eyes, the guests clapping, the flowers shining under the lights. She felt tears burn her eyes as she remembered how cruel she had been that day. She could almost hear her own laughter when she mocked Maya, and for the first time she whispered sorry to the photograph, her voice trembling. I was wrong. I hurt you. I hurt everyone who cared for me. The air around her seemed to sigh softly as if the house itself forgave her just a little. The next morning Laura made a decision. She put on a simple dress for the first time in her life. No diamonds, no makeup, no designer shoes. Just a plain white cotton dress. She looked at herself in the mirror and almost did not recognize the woman staring back. She looked smaller, softer, human. She whispered to her reflection, maybe now I can be someone better. She left the mansion quietly. The gates creaked as they opened, and the wind brushed her face like a cold blessing. She carried with her the silver bracelet and the note, walking down the same road that Daniel had taken weeks before. When she reached the old lane near the market, she found the small house with flowers at the gate, just like Daniel had described it. She stood there for a moment, afraid to knock, her heart racing. What if Maya refused to see her? What if she was still angry? But she took a deep breath and knocked softly. The door opened, and there stood Maya, calm as ever, her eyes gentle but wise. She looked at Laura without surprise, as if she had been waiting for her. Laura's voice shook as she said, I came to say sorry. Maya smiled faintly and stepped aside. Come in, child. Laura walked in slowly, her eyes filling with tears as she saw the simplicity of the house, the warmth of it, the peace she had never known in her mansion. They sat together on the old wooden chairs, and for a long time Laura could not speak. Finally she said, I mocked you. I hurt you. I thought money made me better than others. But now I have nothing. Maya listened quietly, her face full of understanding. Laura spent the entire afternoon with Maya, helping her water the flowers and clean the kitchen. It was the first time she had done such simple things, yet it brought her a strange peace. She laughed softly for the first time in weeks. When she was about to leave, Maya gave her a small bag filled with bread and said, Share this with someone who is hungry, and you will start to heal. Laura nodded, her eyes shining with gratitude. As she walked away, she felt lighter, as if she had left a heavy shadow behind. In the following days, Laura began to visit Maya often. She helped her at the local shelter where poor families came for food and clothes. She learned to listen instead of boast, to give instead of demand, and slowly the bitterness inside her began to fade. People in the town who once feared her name now greeted her kindly. They said she had changed, that her heart had softened, and even though she had lost everything, she now carried something greater, peace. One morning she woke up and looked at the sunrise. She whispered Daniel's name and smiled sadly. She did not know where he was, but she hoped he was happy. She had written him a letter saying, Thank you for teaching me what love truly means. She never sent it, but she kept it under her pillow, a quiet promise to never forget him. The silver bracelet still on her wrist as a reminder of her new beginning. Far away, Daniel stood near a small garden he had helped build for a local school, his hands covered in soil but his heart calm. He looked up at the sky and thought of Laura, wondering if she had changed, and somewhere in that moment a gentle wind passed between them, carrying a silent forgiveness across the miles. Back in the little house, Maya smiled as she watched the two lives she had touched find their own paths again. she whispered to herself. The proud bride has learned to bow, and the lost husband has found his peace. Kindness has done its work, and the lesson of the heart is complete. Outside, the flowers swayed softly under the sun, their petals shining with quiet joy, for in the end love had returned to where it belonged.